Welcome, everyone, to another episode of BReal Talks. I am Sophia Gibbery. Today, we have with us Dr. James Pogue. He is an expert speaker, researcher, consultant, coach, entrepreneur, national champion martial artist, a musician, and a military veteran. He is also an unconscious bias and multi-generational expert. James translates words and actions of colleagues, team members, leaders, and executives into a common language we can all understand. He has expertise in higher education as the director of the Educational Opportunity Program at Binghamton University and director of retention at Wilberforce University. Today, James is going to be talking with us about issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we're going to specifically be focusing on implicit bias and multi-generational teams. Thank you so much for joining us today, James.
Great. I'm looking forward to it.
And my first question for you is, can you kind of talk to us about how your personal experience and identity influenced your career path?
Sure. So I've been fortunate that the folks that have surrounded me over time have helped to obviously shape my identity and the things that are important to me. And on the list of that is that education was critically important to being successful. There was even maybe an idea in our family that education was a silver spoon that was gonna give you this advantage towards the middle class. And while I'm not exactly sure that that's 100% true, I do know that it pushed a lean in towards education and drove my passion for it. So education and I are really good friends, right? So I like classrooms. I like being in classrooms. I like being a student. I like I like teaching. So all of that has been a place of comfort for me. Now, there have been times when I've been differently successful in the classroom, that's for sure. But there's never been a time that I haven't been comfortable in the classroom. So I think that's really helped to drive some things. And I happen to be pretty competitive myself. And there have been times, however, when I did not have the sort of intellectual acumen in a particular area to be successful. But my competitive drive would be like, okay, did you do the best you can? And that's kind of questions my mother would ask me. You know, if you bring home a grade that's lower than you might expect or want, did you do the best you could in that class or that course or whatever it was? And if you did, then that's okay. But if you didn't do the best that you could, then you have to ask yourself some different questions. And then we sort of lean into a different component of my thinking or my personality, if you will, that I'm analytical. I like to unpack things and then decide if when you're repacking, you want to throw that stuff back where it came from, or do you think that something else should go there instead? So those two things have been very useful for me. My love for education and then my desire to my interest in being competitive, and then lean that in with this analytical piece. And last but not least, it'll be I like and want the world to be a better place after I leave it. I like for people to be able to say, after spending 5, 10, 15, 50 minutes with us having a conversation of some kind, they feel better than afterwards, and I feel better than afterwards. With my friendships, it's always that way. The people who I'm the closest with, I can spend 2 hours, 10 hours with them, and I feel recharged, refreshed, definitely challenged. They're not going to let me get away with anything silly, and vice versa. But I feel better for having spent some time with them, and I hope they feel the same about me.
Nice. I feel like there's the common theme that you really have intention in kind of what you do, you know, focusing on education as being really important to you, and then having those relationships with that clear communication with others, even if it isn't what the other person wants to hear, kind of thing.
I think you're exactly right. You can't accidentally be successful, right? You can't trip and fall and say, woohoo, I made it to the top. You may not be purposeful in all of your decisions, but intention matters, and people can feel intention. You know, if you're doing something on purpose, if I'm spending time with you on purpose, it's how people can identify if they trust you or not, right? And so when I talk about trust with teams or leaders, I talk about it from a three-pronged approach, that there's one side of it that is about authenticity. Are you being your real and true self? And humans have a really good ability to identify, are you being you? Are you faking this from me? Are you all in it? Is this the real version of you? I may not know the real version of you, but I can ascertain whether or not you're giving it to me, right? And the second piece is empathy. Are you in this for me or not, right? Are you in this for a different reason? And if you're in it for me, I'm much more likely to be open to you. And the last is logic or reason. Is your logic reasonable, right? And can you explain it to me? It doesn't matter if you've got the best thoughts and the best way to approach it if you can't explain it to me. And the reverse isn't true either. If you can be just talking and not saying anything. But if you have your logic is together, and if your empathy is on point and you are being authentic, I or anyone is much more likely to trust you and then follow you. And so, but all of that has to happen on purpose. You can't accidentally be authentic. You can't accidentally be empathetic, and you can't accidentally have a bunch of good stuff in your head that you've learned over time how to deliver to other folks.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important for our students to hear, right? Is that is so useful in those communications in the workplace, building relationships, and really having an authentic network of people behind you. So, kind of building on your workplace experiences, and I know that you've done talks about this, I'm sure you've done extensive research on it. And looking at implicit bias, how has it hindered workplace productivity for you or teams that you've worked with? And kind of do you have advice about effective ways to address it in the workplace?
Sure. I mean, the implicit bias or bias of any kind, um, if we sort of break it out into the bias you can see and that you know that you have, and the bias that you don't know that you have, right? It's hard to engage with biases that you don't know that you have, but you can surround yourself with people that have different biases than you so that they can poke at your biases that you don't know that you have. They can ask you questions about, hey, well, why are you doing that? Or what's that about? And if you say something like, well, it's just always been that way, or it feels right, or it seems okay, then let that be a trigger to you that, hey, I might have some more work to do in this. And if you surrounded yourself with people and empowered them to poke at your biases, then you might be able to go somewhere with that and challenge those biases. That being said, to answer your question directly, how does it impact productivity across the board? If I can't see that Sophia is a viable and bright and vibrant person, that I don't get her intellect and energy and intention on the tasks for our business. Instead, I see her, I look at her for some reason, and I see her as the best she can be as an admin support, right? And so maybe you applied for the admin support job. That's great. I mean, great. Let's hire you. Let's do that. But if I can't see anything beyond you in that because of what I perceive as your age, what I perceive is your ability, and it's unconscious in my mind, and somebody comes to me and says, hey, Sophia, she's been with you for like 3, 4, 5 years. What do you think about her taking on this role as project manager or as a coordinator or director of? Oh, no, she wouldn't want that. That's not her thing. How do I know? Right? Maybe I'm right. I may not be right. Right. So I think that if your biases are not in check and you're not allowing people to poke them, then you are missing massive opportunity for growth and productivity. And that is connected in a variety of ways to what I call the DIBS Big Eight: diversity, inclusion, and bias Big Eight. And each of these has a massive impact in the ways that we approach our leadership, our fellowship, our learning. And so race, gender, sexuality, politics, religion, socioeconomics, ability, disability, and age. These are huge components of who we are. And if you shift one of them, it changes dramatically how the world sees you and perhaps how you see the world. If you go from being able to see and hear to not being able to see and hear, how does your life change? If I go from being male to female, if someone goes from being Black to Asian, if they go from being, if religion is really critical to you and you're a devout Catholic, to being an atheist, how does that change things for you? So you can easily see how these DIBS Big Eight, I call them, can impact what you're thinking. Now imagine if your unconscious bias is precluding you or pushing you to see people in a particular way because of them, and you're not working on them. Who are you missing? What's the talent pool that you don't even see? Right? The people that you don't expect to perform at an exceptionally high level because that's all they can do, right? Instead of saying, look, what I'm going to need you to do is meet the standard. The standard is excellence. So if you can't meet the standard, I'm going to give you all the support that we can to get you there. Otherwise, we may have to go in a different direction here, right? And make sure I've given you everything you need, depending on what your situation might be. So I think when it comes to productivity, if we're not careful, many of our organizations cannot get beyond mediocre. And it's not because the talent that you have isn't great, it's because you don't see the other great talent around you.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you described once your thinking kind of shifts, then the person isn't just kind of boxed into, okay, that example of Sophia, she's just like administrative support, right? You start to see what other people's capabilities are, and that works its way out to the whole organization and really makes it a very, very productive organization. And you did mention, so I noticed that you make the conscious effort. You don't really say DEI, which is more common, right? People say diversity, equity, and inclusion. You say diversity, inclusion, and bias. So can you kind of talk about why you make that distinction?
Sure. I mean, for me, I don't spend a lot of time trying to detail out the language that you and your organization want to use to address the problem of difference, right? I choose language that is appropriate for the time, that is not going to scratch people and keep them from learning what they need to learn. So many years ago, this conversation would have been a civil rights conversation. Then it would have been an affirmative action conversation. And then it would have been a diversity question, maybe, and then maybe multiculturalism, and then inclusion, then bias, and now welcoming and belonging. Look, I don't have time to go back and forth with you about what the definition of each of these things is. That's an hour out of my time that we could have spent working on the actual problem. What I want to do is get you to see and get us to see, get your team to see that if you can see these people as full people, as unbelievably potentially talented, that's what I want to work on. So I'm not married to this word versus that word, right? And I think that when we are, it is a distraction to the challenge, right? I'm not interested in that debate. Diversity, equity, inclusion, you call it what you want to. What I see is a problem in productivity. What I see is a problem in leadership. What I see is a blindness to a challenge or a group of people. What I see are people that are wounded because they are continually ignored, right? I see people that have expectations of their leaders and leadership, that if they can do all these wonderful things, like say run a university or run a department or be a professor emeritus, then why couldn't you see that you treated me like crap because of my gender, because of my skin tone? If you're that smart, why couldn't you see this? I see people that are disappointed in leaders because of that. So I have zero intrigue about what is the right word for the moment. Somebody will come up with something else. I'll leave that to the linguistic experts and the historians. I have other things to do right now.
Nice, nice. Yeah, that is very, very valid and true, right? There are people in offices every day who are feeling the weight of being excluded and things along those lines. So at the end of the day, it doesn't, the point is that we're talking about addressing it. It's not so much the language around it sometimes. So you also, I like the way that you talk about multi-generational teams. From my perspective, oftentimes people kind of look at multi-generational teams in a way of, oh, what are all the differences between generations and how do different communication styles kind of cause conflicts in the workplace? But you really see it as a positive aspect of the workplace. So can you kind of talk about some of the benefits of multi-generational teams?
Sure. I mean, some of our millennial friends, like when I spent like 2 years ago, most of my talks were on generational dynamics. And I identified this or coined this phrase called multi-generational intelligence. Where are you in your ability to engage people of different generations? It is not about can you memorize what the dates are for who's born when and what's the difference between a boomer and a millennial and a Gen Zer and a cusper. No, that is not what intelligence is about. I can get anybody to memorize things. What I want you to be able to do and to increase your multi-generational intelligence is your ability to weave into your leadership or your team or your drive or your attention the different skill sets that are required to pull out of your team what they can bring, right? So I might need to have some general knowledge that, say, for example, our millennial friends and Gen Z friends, they have this really, really broad opportunity to gain knowledge, right? The vastness of the internet has been normal for them forever. Okay, but that doesn't mean it's unavailable to a 50-year-old. Google works the same for everybody. right? It's just they were born into Google and you had to come to it a little bit later. So the part of the difference is my expectation is that that 50-year-old, that 60-year-old has engaged their internet knowledge, if you will, through their 30 years of experience in the workplace, right? I expect you to have mushed that around in your head and come to me with a product. Now, inside of all that mushing together are all of your biases that it's been woven, it's weaving its way through. Now I've got a millennial colleague who has the same knowledge, and they weave it through their experience with different kinds of biases based on their experience and age. I need that too. Then I need my Gen Z friend who just is, maybe they may be an intern or they just graduated from college, who knows? And I need that information around the table too. And if you don't bring it, then why are you around the table? Right? So as a leader, I have to demand that of you because you said that you could give it or that you would give it, and expect you to perform at a level that is that conforms with your generational dynamic, right? But I shouldn't use it as a limiting factor. I should use it as a way that the puzzles can work together, right? And I have to encourage people to challenge one another, not necessarily in spite of their generational differences, but because of them, right? And that if I'm the 60-year-old team member and my millennial friend challenges me, right? I, as the leader has to make it plain that that challenge is about the idea. Challenge my ideas. Push me, but don't attack James. That's not fair. Attack James's ideas. Attack James's processes, his thinking, his analytics. That is completely fair. That's all on the table, right? And that's how we get better. Because and that's chess, not checkers, right? And the expectation is that if you're going to be on a great team, you got to be able to play chess in the context of your area of responsibility.
Yeah, and I really feel like the way that you describe that, you're kind of breaking down what a workplace can look like when you really break down those biases, those kind of personal attacks, and really include very different perspectives, different voices, different insights, and kind of weigh the pros and cons of it and see what it has to offer in terms of the overall value and shaping what an organization is doing.
I think that's exactly right. You know, this is not it's not easy, but it's not rocket science per se. It's human science. And we have become very good at going to our corners and who's the us and who's the them. Let me get with the us's and blame the thems. And it can be generational. I mean, I'd give talks and there could be 1,000 people in the room. And I'd ask the millennials in the room to respond with, tell me, describe a baby boomer to me. Old fashioned, tight, stubborn, old, all these terms that would just fly out in a room full of 1,000 people. Then I'd say to the baby boomers, well, describe to me millennials, spoiled, entitled, all these kinds of terms. And I would say, look here, how was that nice? How was that kind? How was that giving? How does that facilitate a team? And some of you have said these exact same words around the table to somebody across the table from you, and you don't know them. And then you might have the unmitigated gall to look to the one to your left or your right and say, but not you, you're one of the good ones, as if that makes it better, right? And none of that helps us work together. And then I would switch the tables on them and say, well, look, you wouldn't do that as it relates to someone's gender. You wouldn't say because she's a woman, she's stubborn. You wouldn't say because she's Latina that she's entitled. You would find that to be sexist or racist. So how did we get to a point where being ageist is okay? You're talking about decades of us versus them that has been ingrained in us, that has become very normal. And when I talk about the big eight, you can easily see where politics fits into that. There's us and them that's dug deeply into who we are. Go to your corners and figure out who to fight with. Instead of, why do I care if you're a Republican or Democrat on its face? Or an independent or Green Party? What I really should be concerned about are who are you? And if you're on my team, can you produce? And do your morals and values and ethics align with the direction the organization wants to go? You decide what kind of political party that you want to affiliate with. That has nothing to do with me. And then if we find that we're misaligned, then we'll deal with that. But based upon a label, based upon skin tone, based upon your gender, based upon your age, we have words for that. And none of them are good. So how about we lean a different direction and decide how to utilize sort of human science to get to know humans, as opposed to labeling like we're shopping at Target or Walmart or CVS to go pick up the item that we want. I think that is reflexive, simplistic thinking, and relationships are much more complex than that.
And I do have a tendency to agree with you that ageism is one of those where we do let people get away with those kind of remarks, right? Or, oh, they're not good with technology just because they're an older person, when it's like, but why are we saying this? As you said, you can learn the technology, right? So those kinds of things, we should definitely really focus on our biases in those areas.
And if I can push on that to say that when people that are quote unquote older say, I'm not good with technology, I'm not letting you off the hook. What does you being 62 have to do with you running this spreadsheet or not? Your job is to run the spreadsheet. The new software package came down. I'm going to set up a class for you to go to. You need to go to the class. You need to run the spreadsheet. That's your job. And you telling me I'm not good with technology, I don't know what you want me to do with that. What I need you to do is say, I just need a little bit more time to figure it out. Can I do 2 classes, right? I need you to offer me solutions. I'm forgetting what, there's this old phrase, something like, don't bring me labor pains, bring me a baby, bring me a product, bring me a solution, right? And when I work with my assistant, she's really good at, we'll talk about a challenge and she'll give me an A, B, or C choice. You want to do this, this, or this? Because she's already processed through the challenges that may exist. Right? That's what leadership needs. So I might be 62, I might be 72, and I might be challenged with technology. Okay, great. How does that stop you from doing the job that you're getting compensated to do? And let's not assume, therefore, that because somebody's 24, that they're adept at technology. There's internet deserts. There's people that can't afford technology in their high schools and some colleges, and they are just figuring it out themselves. So these biases weave themselves in, and then we reinforce them with our language and our attitude. So we got to be careful on all these different directions on who we're saying is what and can do what.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that. I have worked with people in their early 20s, and the social media marketing always delegated to them, right? And they've kind of talked to me one-on-one and been like, look, Sophia, I'm not good at social media. I don't really like this. So there's all of these kinds of assumptions around age, for sure. And then
because you can spell IG doesn't mean you're good at it.
Exactly, really. And kind of, so we've been talking a lot about these kinds of biases, what they look like, navigating them in the workplace. What words do you have for students or recent grads who are trying to really address issues around these areas, but they're met with challenges in the workplace?
Which challenges did you say? I missed it.
If they're trying to address diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they're met with challenges.
Yeah, I think it to some extent it depends on how they're addressing it. So I think that you have to approach it with a sense of authority because you know what you know, but humility because you may not be an expert in it. Right. So I spend my life in this work, and I learn things all the time, and I'm challenged all the time, and I unpack a bias every now and again. There's somebody pokes me like, why did you say that? Why would you believe that? And I live in this space. So I recognize that in the more that I know about it, the more I realize that I have to be cautious and careful. So just because you happen to have grown up in a place where you had a bunch of different friends that had spoke different languages, had different skin tones, gender fluidity was a thing, whatever it was, just because you're comfortable with that doesn't mean you're good at it, that you're good at navigating it. One of the things my younger colleagues often are challenged with is that they have relationships or connections, but maybe not deep friendships. And that's some of the difference between, say, that my 65-year-old colleague and my 30 or 20-year-old colleague. These deep relationships that you've had for 10 or 15 or 20 years where somebody has said, look, James, what you just said was terrible. It was not a nice thing to say. And nobody around you is going to tell you, but I'm going to tell you because I'm your friend, because I've known you for 10 or 15 years. And you need to go and you need to apologize. You need to rework your business plan, whatever it is. They can get into my guts pretty quickly. And because we've been through some ups and downs, I know that they're doing it in love and compassion. the same may not be able to be said for some of my 20-year-old colleagues. If somebody comes at them, they might take it in a different way because it's the first time or second time they've been pushed like that. So I say that to say, if you're being pushed, you're trying to accomplish something or talk about something in this sort of diversity, equity, inclusion, bias space, and somebody pushes at you, right? Try to unpack that conversation, right? Why does this problem exist? Why are you pushing back on me? Like, can we have a conversation about that? Can we go grab a sandwich? Talk to me about why when I raised my hand and asked some questions around the gender neutral this or race related that, or the statement that our CEO put out around the recent protest in Black Lives Matter, why was I shut down? Can we peel that back some? And you can't run into running. You have to crawl and walk first, right? And so the person across from you may need to take the time to unpack it for themselves as well. And the patience that it takes to allow someone else to unpack their argument, recognizing that them unpacking their argument is learning for them, that's a wonderful gift to give someone, right? Time, your attention, your empathy, your authenticity, right? So that they can look at you and say, okay, we're going somewhere with this. Right? There are a few times when there are black and white solutions. Right and wrong is very clear. Many times those decisions involve body counts. Right? So when it comes to, we have to decide, is this one of those times? Like, I think about the protests that are happening now, if we think more globally, and if I were to take your question and frame it into what is happening in protests / riots / looting, etc., you have, in many cases, mostly young people leading most of the protests in most of the cities. They're accepting most of the risk, taking most of the damage to their bodies and time and finances, and putting themselves at coronavirus risk in addition. I'm happy to be in the back seat and watch them drive. I'm happy to do that because I think that's maybe what needs to happen right now. I'm okay. So with the challenge that they're facing then is that how do we address this challenge? How do we make a difference? Is this something we need to talk about and process through? Not all the time. You know, Martin Luther King said, rioting is the voice of the unheard. Right? Rioting is very rarely a person's first choice. It's often the third or fourth or fifth. And I feel badly for the person whose shop got destroyed. They may be a good person. Their family may be good people. And in the riots, their stuff got destroyed. I'm really sorry about that. I truly am. And I know that this person's voice, this is not the first time that they said, please pay attention to me and my pain. It may have been the 10th time, right? So I think that you have to find your path and stick to it with honor and integrity, and then recognize that you may have to walk it alone. A one-person protest is still a protest. A one-person riot is still a riot. So do your thing, right? Have the courage and integrity to stand out there and scream at the wind. Right? Because somebody has to. I can tell you for many of us a year or 2 or 10 or 20 ago before me, I can imagine that they felt like they were trying to push the ocean back with their bare hands. It's a lonely enterprise. But somebody will see you out there pushing. And whether they come and join you that day or 10 days later, they're on their way. Just have faith that they will be.
Yeah, that pushing, that resiliency, and also just really time, right? Like taking that time to kind of critically think, peel the layers back on these situations, because there are so many layers, and really assess the space that you're in, right? When you are experiencing challenges and setbacks. And then that self-reflection of, at the end of the day, like you said, if you are the only one doing it and you know it's good work and you know it's important, then kind of keep on striving down that path. So my last question for you is, after I asked to interview you, I started looking into who you were a little bit more. And I did notice you had the DIB Talks, you had the Candid Conversation podcasts. And I saw, from my perspectives, a lot of parallels in what you're trying to do there with what I'm trying to do with BReal Talks. So from your own voice, can you talk about your goal of these podcasts?
Sure. So they started because I was bored. The world shut down, and I was like, I'm just walking around in circles, self-quarantine, and all these kinds of wonderful things. And me and my brain were like, look, I'm bored. My brain was like, if you don't do something with me, you're going to lose me. Use me or lose me. So my brain and I had a discussion, and I decided I didn't want it to leave me because I need it. And I said, well, what can I do? What can I offer? What am I good at? You know, and I like to talk, but that doesn't mean I'm any good at it. I like to talk to people. That doesn't mean I'm any good at it. So I just asked some people, what do they think and what did I have to offer? Some mentors and other folks. And it came down to I can create a space where people are comfortable enough to talk about things they otherwise wouldn't. Right? I can convince people to talk about something they otherwise wouldn't. They'll trust me. And I'm not going to put them in a situation where it's two pit bulls going at each other. I don't think that that's productive. At the end of the day, also, I'm an educator, as I mentioned, to come full circle to your first question. I want people to learn something from having spent time with me. So I love watching, and I learn a lot from watching the news, cable news networks and so on, but sometimes those are pit bulls going at each other. It's not education. But I can't trust them to be educational because they're not educators. They're journalists. That's not what they do. So why would I expect, them to do something they're not qualified to do? So I am. So let me set it up. So the first of the podcast was to talk about to have two people role model a political divide. These are two people, both of whom I would invite to a barbecue. I like them both, but they disagree very strongly on a political component. One is a Trump supporter and one is not. One is an oil and gas guy from Texas, and one is a liberal lesbian association executive. And so they have some diametrically opposed spaces. I was like, will you all come and have this tough conversation for me, and let me poke you with sticks in front of people? So that's how it came to be, that I can use my platform, the few people that might be interested in listening to what I have to say, as a way of introducing, educating folks, either by role modeling or by them providing actual data and information. So it's about teaching, it's about learning, it's about providing a voice for people who may not otherwise have one. Even I think 3 weeks ago, I did one with young people in their 20s, 20-somethings. And one of the best things that came out of that was when I asked them a question that now I ask almost all the time in my webinars. Out of 100% of the race-related education you think you need to have, how much do you have? And their answer was somewhere between 3 to 5%, right? The highest I've gotten is 40%, and that person knew they went too far, right? So that means everybody's failing. Nobody gets a passing grade on the race question. Black, white, brown, male, female, political differences notwithstanding, everybody's failing. Well, that's a lot of room for growth, isn't it, for an educator, right? If you got a 20%, we can double your score. You're still failing, but there's a lot of room to grow when you got 80%. So I'm gonna take this in an optimistic fashion and keep pushing people. But I think that question, my learning from that question allows me to set people up and say, I've only got 5%, which means I've got 95% of growth that I can engage with. All I got to do is open up and see things a little differently. And by osmosis and gravity, I'm going to go to 7%. And if I want to, and I drive towards it, I can get to 15, 18%. And I never guarantee that it's going to be easy because some of it sucks. To look at something, to read something, to hear something, and have your guts wound up. Yeah, well, yes. Some of it's terrible things to learn or to be exposed to, and to figure out how to weave it into your life. But I'm glad that I jumped off the podcast cliff. It has been educational for me. I've learned as much as anybody else, maybe more. I'm grateful to be able to keep doing it, and I'm grateful for people that happen to trip over it and find it, and it does something for them. I imagine that most of the difference that it's made, I'll never know.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to leave it. Keep striving for excellence for our students, empowering advice, and also take that initiative to manage your career. See what you're good at, be creative, figure out ways that you can make your own platform, create a space that you think is important and needed in society. So thank you so much for joining us, James. Thank you to the students watching. I will see you on the next one.
Thank you.